while standing in a gleaming elevator in a large hotel in the huge city of Philadelphia. A young man and his daughter also came onto the elevator. And so I said to her, "Young lady, which floor would you and your dad like?" She appeared to be about 4 years of age. And the young lady looked at me and said, 7 million. And I said, "Wow, that's a long ways up." And so I took my finger and went and touched the imaginary $7 million button. And it was way, way high. Why, it was, thank God I'm tall. The button was all the way at the intersection of the wall of the elevator and the ceiling. And I pushed the imaginary button. And as I did so, the most amazing thing happened. You see this little door opens for the three of us. It was a door that was the word yes. And it was never spoken. But once that little door, yes, was opened wide, then the most amazing thing happened, because then, the three of us began to talk about, we began to talk about that imaginary voice, the voice of the elevator lady, that tells you which floor you're on, and why we pretended and said that lady's voice sounded like she was from Ireland or Scotland. And then we talked about the buttons in the elevator, why they were bigger than a giant's thumb. And then we talked about the fact that there was once a day when there weren't buildings that went 30-some floors up, much less 7 million. And the little girl, she laughed and she giggled, and she almost danced in the elevator. And her dad and I grinned at one another when all of a sudden the lady's voice at the elevator said the floor that we were on, and it dinged, and the doors opened, and the little girl ran off down the hallway. And the dad hesitated for a brief moment, and he turned around and he looked at me and he said, "Hey, thank you." And I knew exactly what he meant by that, because what he was really saying to me was, "Thank you for your willingness to be 4 years old again." Because, isn't it true that when we can get there, when we can find ourselves thinking that we're the same age, and we're all from the same country, and we're all speaking the same language through our teeth, why then there's something oddly familiar about it, isn't it? And yet it happens not often enough. But when it does, when we can all be 4 years of age again, when we can all have the mindset that we're from the same country, that we speak the same language, why then all of a sudden it's like coming home again. To come home to a family that we hardly ever see anymore. This story is not mine. It was written by an author and a poet named Brian Doyle. And yet, when I read the story, I smiled because I had a similar experience in a city called Philadelphia with a young man and his daughter who likewise got on an elevator with me, and while our conversation was not as creative, it brought a smile to my face. And so why do I share with you that story today? Well, because, my friends, you and I are invited. We are invited by our Lord to get on the elevator called forgiveness. And we are invited to get on the elevator not just with Jesus, but with Peter as well. Peter is there. He is in control of the buttons. You know, the ones that are bigger than a giant's thumb. And we're getting ready to choose the floor we wish to go to. And Peter thinks that when it comes to forgiveness, the 7th floor should be just more than fine. Some of us, I think, wouldn't even be that generous when it comes to forgiveness. Some of us might choose rather to push the button that goes to the basement. But yet Peter, he's generous. He wants you and I to go to the 7th floor, and yet here stands our Lord, and he's like the 4-year-old girl. And he says, imagine for a moment that we would reach up with our thumbs, not quite as big as a giant's thumb, but to use our thumbs and to touch the button that says 77. Or better yet, like the 4-year-old that says 7 million. Wow. Which of us wants to go that far? To go that high up? To be able to attain that kind of a view? It would be amazing, wouldn't it? So why is it that we don't want to have that kind of view? Why is it that we don't want to go that far when it comes to forgiveness? Well, it's because you hurt me once, fine. But you hurt me more than that, and the forgiveness is going to stop. And so, of course, we then find ourselves where the book of Sirach reminds us in today's first reading, where wrath and anger are hateful things, and yet the sinner hugs them tight. And that's what we do, don't we? When somebody wrongs us multiple times, when somebody offends us in the wrong way, when somebody has gotten our forgiveness once, and for whatever reason they have hurt us yet again, why we find ourselves saying, nope, not again. It's not going to happen. We are no longer pushing any buttons on the elevator of forgiveness because we're not even getting on the elevator. We've chosen to stay where we are, on the ground where we find ourselves, that quite literally is getting us absolutely nowhere, other than more and more frustrated because, of course, that person, because we've chosen not to forgive them, why, they continue to live on in our heads. They live there rent-free. And they consume so much of our waking moments and our time and our energy. So Jesus invites us, along with the 4-year-old girl. He invites us to get on the elevator of forgiveness. He invites us to aim and to desire and to be willing to go far. This means, my friends, forgiveness doesn't mean that we simply let the person off the hook, that we simply deny that any wrongdoing was ever done. That's not what forgiveness is. But forgiveness is you and I in our ability to let go of a past that we somehow hope would be different. We have to let go of a past that we hope could be different, because the reality is, my friends, that's what it is. It is the past. So I would invite you to look at the word forgive, and I would invite you to make it 2 words. Forgive. I'm all for giving compassion. I'm for giving love. I'm for giving mercy. I'm for giving understanding. I'm for giving another chance. Why? Because you and I have been given that. Do you remember that time, that moment, when you and I hurt somebody, did something, said something that was incredibly harmful and hurtful in another person's life? And do you remember that moment when they forgave us and basically gave you and I an opportunity to what? To move forward. They gave us another chance. They invited us to go higher on this incredible journey that forgiveness can take us. And once we are willing to push that imaginary button that doesn't have to be imaginary anymore, why then when we choose to forgive one another And we can make that our common language, as though we were from the same country, as though we were speaking the same language. Why then, each and every day when we choose to forgive one another, when we choose to give people another chance because we've been given another chance and we know what it feels like when we're granted that opportunity and we give it to another person, why all of a sudden, while it doesn't happen as often as we would like it to, it feels incredibly familiar to us. And it becomes hopefully so familiar to us that it's like coming home again. It's like seeing family again that we hardly ever see anymore. So Jesus is inviting us today to no longer hang on to hatred and vengeance, because we don't need to hug those tight anymore. Rather, he invites you and I to join Peter, to join the disciples, to join the young man and his 4-year-old daughter. And he invites us onto the elevator that can take us to new heights and new possibilities. And he asks us all the same question: which floor would you like to go to? And we, with glee in our eyes and with a dance in our steps, like the 4-year-olds say, 7 million.